Welcome back to Two Keto Dudes. This is Carl Franklin from Connecticut in the United States. And in February 2016, I put myself on a ketogenic diet to take control of my metabolism. In just 2.5 months, I managed to reverse all my markers of type 2 diabetes with diet alone. As of now, I'm 80 pounds lighter with no signs of diabetes or heart disease.
Hi, I'm Richard Morris in Canberra, Australia. I've been on a ketogenic diet since April of 2014. When I started, I was very sick for complications from type 2 diabetes. Within 6 months of starting a ketogenic diet, all of my biomarkers of disease had disappeared. I've lost about 100 pounds. I've completely turned my health around.
And this show is a document of our experiences thriving for years in ketosis.
Thriving and reversing diabetes.
Yeah, and hopefully that might help a few people who are curious about this kind of dietary hacking.
Yeah, we're not doctors. We don't want to give any medical advice, but we are keen to share our own experiences.
Yep.
We're actually both software developers, so we're not afraid of a little technical detail, are we, Carl?
Bring it on!
We've done some research into our own deranged metabolisms and the science behind them. We share studies that we've found in the show notes.
You'll probably work out pretty quickly that we're both foodies.
Oh, yeah.
We love to cook and we love to eat.
Mm-hmm.
In every episode, we both share a keto recipe that cannot be ignored.
No, it cannot.
So let's start podcast number 117. Professor Ken Sikaris demystifies cholesterol.
Heard you say you're due for a little.
So, Richard, do we have any apologies or corrections from last week's show?
Last week's show was number 116, Martin Siebes on strategic dissonance. No apologies. I think Martin did a wonderful job. It was a little bit technical for people who aren't into business management, but it was a fascinating interview. I really enjoyed it.
You know, the book Who Moved My Cheese came to mind when I looked at that. I mean, when the situation's underpinning your whole strategy for making money in the case of business, right, or in the case of health, you know, for treating patients, changes, you know, you have to accept it. And it's hard.
If you dig in, if you double down on the old way of doing things, you're going to end up in a little cul-de-sac and the rest of the world's going to pass you by.
Yeah. And that's happening now as we speak. So let's revisit what a ketogenic diet is.
Sure. A ketogenic diet is one where you don't eat sugar or starch.
Right.
You get all of your energy from fat.
Fat.
Yeah.
Delicious fat.
Yeah. So minimum amount of protein, just enough to maintain your body mass. We're not going to use protein for energy. We're not going to use carbs for energy. That's sugar and starch. We're going to get all of our energy from fat, as we said.
Yep. That's it. 20 grams or less of carbohydrates a day, moderate protein, 1 gram to 1.5 grams per kilogram of lean body mass.
Yep.
And fat for everything else.
Yeah, to satiety. That's the trick. You want to make sure that your body is telling you when to stop fueling and when to start fueling up again. If you have no carbs, if you keep your carbohydrate intake to minimum as possible, then your body's satiety signals all start to work accurately. It's wonderful, it really is.
It is wonderful, it really is. Yep. So how was your week, my friend?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I've in the process of getting ready for another chemistry exam, which is going to happen on Monday. We're recording this on Sunday morning. So I'm really head down, bum up in the books. And it's good with chemistry that we actually have 3 exams over the semester. And so they're small, discrete components. But unfortunately, this one is all acid-base equilibrium and it's doing my head in. But I did learn something interesting the other day. We're doing quantum chemistry, and you know the story about the makeup of atoms. Atoms are a nucleus, and orbiting around the nucleus are these electrons, and you know the different atoms have different number of electrons orbiting around them. Well, they don't actually orbit. They phase in and out from place to place without transitioning through various places. So they're literally phasing in and out. And so we have this idea of electrons sort of zipping around the nucleus. But they're only in those orbits for 90% of the time.
Right.
10% of the time they could be anywhere else in the universe.
Yeah, that's the whole quantum entanglement theory.
Well, actually, this is just the nature of electrons. Electrons are just a probability field. And electrons in my body right now, some of them could be watching C-beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate or watching attack ships on fire on the shoulder of Orion.
I get it.
So anyway, I found quantum chemistry fascinating, and I think that's a field I'm going to spend some time in. Other things that have happened this week, we spoke last week of David Ludwig's study on type 1 diabetics.
Yep.
And of course, all of the endocrinologists are saying, it's only a study of the opinions of people in a Facebook group who eat low carb. And of course, if you ask people in a Facebook group about low carb diets, if they all eat low carb and they all like what they're doing, of course they're going to have great opinions. But what they are missing is that the study actually spoke to the doctors and the labs to confirm the diagnostic story of each of these individuals. And, it's worth mentioning that there is almost no population of type 1 diabetics that have such great glucose control. If you can show me another group of diabetics, another group of type 1 diabetics who have as good glucose control as the members of the type 1 grit community, I will be very impressed. But, this is really, it is a hypothesis-generating activity. The study doesn't actually say anything about causal effects of, a low-carb diet doesn't necessarily guarantee to cause this glucose stability, but it's certainly hypothesis generating, and it demands a properly controlled clinical trial to test. Finally, the other thing that happened this week is that journalist Marianne Demystifies, we mentioned last week, who I met up in Sydney, she has just been vindicated. She did this article on statins, which got everybody very upset, and she had trolls chasing her on Twitter and who were making her life a hell. And basically she was having people putting in vexatious complaints about her original PhD thesis. And so for the past almost 7 years now, she has been fighting people trying to cast aspersions on her PhD thesis, saying that she fudged some of the data and copied somebody else's results and a bunch of other things. Well, she has just been vindicated this week, and it has been shown.
Now, what does that mean? Did somebody reproduce her results as most scientists do?
No, what happened was that the University of South Australia, where she got her accreditation, went back over her research and said what she did was the standard of the time, and there was absolutely no problem with what she did. So she's essentially been vindicated. But the problem is that she spent hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting this vexatious complaint, and it's just people who are upset because she gored their statin bull. So anyway, but it's good news for the low carb community.
Sure is.
So that was my week. How was yours?
Really good. Last week, I was in Seattle for a Microsoft Developer Conference. Build is the name of it.
Yeah.
And I ate really well, except for one dinner at an Italian restaurant that I had to attend, and I had some of their homemade pasta and a small dessert. Now, I had ribeye, too. I mean, I ate the good stuff. I just I sampled some carbs, right? So as I had predicted from the last time I did this, the next morning I felt fine and I wasn't hungry. Now, so it makes me understand how some people can go completely off the keto diet after being fat adapted and stalling, Right. You have this combination of a stall, you feel good and you sort of get cocky, and then, you just try a little carbs and stuff, and wow, that's I don't feel too bad, and maybe I'll have some more, and then they continue to cheat, and before you know it, they're having the same old symptoms of, painful swelling and edema and all the carb cravings come back and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I can sort of see how that happens. And but for me, of course, I got right back on the bandwagon the next morning with, wait for it, bacon and eggs.
Bacon and eggs. Nice.
With extra butter. And of course, I wasn't hungry all day until dinner, and I was right back into it. It was no big deal. So, of course, I paid for it on the scale, but mostly with water weight. So anyway, I came home and immediately started a fast. So 2 days ago, I started with only heavy cream and a couple iced coffees.
Mm-hmm. That's your normal first fasting day, right?
Right. Yeah. I just, when I'm hungry and I've had proper electrolytes, and it lasts for more than 5 minutes, then I have some heavy cream and it goes away.
Yeah.
So yesterday I only did that once, which was great.
Yeah.
Fasted all day. And I'm down 7 pounds in 2 days, right back where I was before all the, everything else happened.
That's cool.
Before the shenanigans. Yep.
Yep.
But this is cool. I met a guy at Build who was actually working as a bartender, and I'm not going to tell everybody his name. He wanted to remain anonymous, but he was like pushing the bar cart, and he came to me and said, "Man, I listened to your tech podcast and your keto podcast, and based on what I learned from you and Jason Fung, I fasted for 60 days and lost 80 pounds.
Yikes.
60 days, 2 months, and lost 80 pounds.
Wow.
And he said, the biggest problem was getting my electrolytes correct. Taking way more salt than I thought I needed, taking magnesium on a slow release, or taking it multiple times during the day.
Sure. And
also potassium. He found that he did some homework and found the toxicity level of potassium, and you really have to take a lot of potassium for your weight in order to have a problem with it.
Right.
So he did that research, and once he got his electrolytes right, fasting, he says, is the easiest thing in the world. Just, he finds starting over the most difficult thing. So people who fast for 2 or 3 days and then stop. And I remember Jason saying that the most difficult fast is a 2-day fast, because you're just starting to get into the lack of hunger and the energy and all of that.
Into the groove, yeah.
Right. So this time I plan to fast for longer than I usually do.
Okay, cool.
Yep. I've got a new software project that's going to require mental acuity and focus, and there's nothing better than a fast for that.
Yeah. I would mention actually that the guy who fasted for the longest time that we know of is a guy by the name of Angus Barbieri. And he was supported by a hospital and took daily electrolytic supplements. So that was the only thing he ate.
Yeast.
Yeah, and yeast, I think. But
he had a yeast something. Yeah, that's right. But a multivitamin, essentially.
Right. But I think the yeast was for vitamin B1. Now, it's important to keep your electrolytes up. The reason why he is the last person that Guinness recognized as the longest faster was a couple of people who tried for the record died. And so it's worth, and Guinness said, right, that's it. We're not going to have this category anymore.
Right.
And it's worth making the point that a 60-day fast is really quite extreme. Personally, I went for 10 days, and after 10 days, I felt like I'd accomplished my goals, and I didn't feel quite right, and so I stopped my fast. And you really have to be in tune with your body to be able to do that kind of thing. I reckon if you're going to go for more than 4 or 5 days, you really should have some medical support helping you.
Yes, that's right. And fortunately, I do. I have a great doctor. Dr. Ken Berry is my doctor now.
Yeah. And
of course, we're friends with Jason. And if I ever have any kinds of problems, they're just an email message away. So I'm very lucky in that respect.
Yeah.
Of course, you don't need to be personal friends with Jason and Megan to get their advice. They answer questions all the time on the internet, on their Facebook groups. So they're just very great, accessible people.
And you can sign up for their coaching. They have a very reasonable coaching program that some of our friends work for, and it's a very reasonable support. Yep. And it's probably a good thing to do if you're going to be going for longer fasts, to join some type of community like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's intensivedietarymanagement.com. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, so I'm doing this cooking show, right? Okay. Carl's Keto Kitchen on YouTube.
Yeah.
Didn't do it last week because I was in Seattle, but going forward, I'm going to do a series on sauces.
Nice.
Starting this week with a beurre monté.
Very good.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the recipe for this week, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, not just the sauce, of course. I'm gonna cook something with it.
Yeah.
So I feel like giving something away. Do you?
Yeah. Let's give away some loot. What do we got?
Well, we got a signed copy of the book "Lies My Doctor Told Me" by Dr. Ken Berry, who I just mentioned. Yeah. This is just a great book, and I'm doing the audio version of this, of course, as I've said before. It's just a great book because he talks about conventional wisdom and then how his clinical experience challenged that conventional wisdom.
Right.
And that led him to do research, and the research disproved it. And so, therefore, he calls them medical lies, but of course, they're just, non-truisms that people just promote without thinking about it for no apparent reason. So it's a great evidence-based book about the things you think about health are mostly wrong.
Yeah. You realize that very soon you will have finished doing the audiobook, and you'll be the narrator, and you're going to have to stop calling it a great book because you're involved in it.
Yeah,
I'll do-
that's
I'll-
right. If you're listening
Yeah.
to this in the next, probably in the summertime, you're going to be able to go to audible.com
Nice.
or Amazon and
hear
just
Carl
order it.
talk about it, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that's it. We're going to give away a signed copy right now.
So who's our winner?
Today's winner is April Edberg.
Congratulations, April.
And April was picked at random from all the people who signed up currently for the 2 Keto Dudes fan club. And if you don't know what that is, you can go to fanclub.2keto.com, answer just a few questions, and then you're signed up. And, we send out newsletters periodically, and we also pick a winner every week for something. Right now, we're giving away signed copies of Lies My Doctor Told Me.
Yeah, and if you don't want to wait to win some swag, you can always buy some online at gear.2keto.com.
All right, then, before we bring on your interview with Professor Sikaris, we need to read some... Mail!
Well,
You get it. You get the last word. Go ahead.
I've already got it. So, who do you got, Carl?
All right, well, I'm going to read an entry from the great big public keto before and after thread that we started on the ketogenic forums. We have other threads on the forums, but they're private.
Right.
And we wanted to start a thread where people knew that when they published their stories here, they'd be public. They're going to be shared. They're going to be read. And therefore, if you have pictures that you don't want, don't put them up there or put a watermark on them.
Yeah, but the good thing about this is that having your stories go public gives people motivation, gives them incentive, and it lets other people
Absolutely.
know what can be done with the ketogenic diet because, there's nothing quite like seeing a before and after photo and realizing what a difference it's made to a person's life.
And there's even more nothing like seeing 100 before and after photos
There's that
all
too,
in one sitting.
Yeah, it's funny, the likelihood of most people losing weight and keeping it off for more than 6 months is extremely low. It's like something like 5% of all people who ever diet ever manage to keep the weight off after 6 months. We have hundreds of people on the ketogenic forums who've done it. It's just incredible.
And so far, there's 173 messages as of this recording on this thread.
Wow.
So this one is from Raj. And Raj, he's from New Jersey.
Yeah, I know Raj.
Yeah, he came up to the first Keto Mini Fest that we did back in April in New London. And he came up, he says, I want to help. I want to chop vegetables or do whatever you need me to. And he did. Now, so Raj is 85 pounds down and off all medication. So I'm going to read his entry. You got to go see his pictures to believe it. But here he goes. Here's his backstory. He says, I'm 54 years old, 5'8", 250 pounds. I was 297, diabetic, hypertensive, and on my way to an early cremation. By the way, Raj has got a great sense of humor and a great voice. Like, if there was ever the voice, like a podcaster voice, he's got a great voice.
Yeah, he's got a deep basso voice, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Deep voice.
So he says, in January 2017, my endocrinologist gave me a heads up. Even though I had lost 20 pounds with diet and exercise, my A1C was sticking at 7.4 to 7.7. He told me that I was heading towards insulin and that it was an inevitable and natural evolution of my deadly progressive disease. Insulin shots would have destroyed my newly chosen profession as a commercial pilot. So I decided to hit it harder at the gym and cut out desserts and reduced breads. I believed that I could help my blood glucose spikes by burying my carbs with protein. Common scenario, right? I fought hard and lost another 20 pounds using CRAP, calorie restriction as primary.
That's Jason Funk's term for it, It's calories in, calories out, otherwise known as.
Yeah, surprisingly, my diabetes did not properly respond.
Surprise, surprise.
I was having a breakfast as soon as I woke up to help lower my fasting blood glucose levels. I was not skipping any meals because that would mean too big a meal and spiking sugars. I was doing all the things that the establishment told me I had to do to help my diabetes. The lack of response was striking.
Yeah.
Finally, having lost 40 pounds from peak, I was going on vacation October 17 to visit family, and I decided I would stop breads, rice, etc. altogether so as not to gain back the hard-fought weight loss. While I didn't gain or lose weight, I did find I could not eat or overeat as I used to be able to do.
Now, it's worth mentioning that Raj is Indian, so going off rice is a big deal, and breads as well.
Absolutely. Culturally, that's very difficult.
Yeah, that's not easy culturally. Yeah.
Yeah. I started feeling bloated all the time and just naturally started skipping meals and eating less. Now, when he says bloated, he does mean full, right?
Sure.
And this is something that, people usually don't feel good when they're bloated because of carbohydrates, but it's a totally different bloating than he's talking about. Yeah. I went on a quest and found, drum roll, the 2 Keto Dudes.
That's us.
Yeah. Halloween, October 31st, 2017, I went keto at 255 pounds and with an A1C of 7.4.
That's diabetic.
Yep. That's where I was, 7.4. I stopped taking the statin. In 2 weeks, I was reducing diabetes medications. In 4 weeks, I eliminated all medications except metformin and a blood pressure pill. 2.5 months later, January 23rd, 2018, I had an A1C of 6. And in consult with my doctor, stopped taking all medications.
Well done.
Yeah. Yes, 2.5 months of keto reversed all the markers of my physical ailments, mental aside. Bonus, I had lost another 45 pounds and was down to 212, 85 pounds off my peak. Yeah. I had just discovered the documentary on fasting on Amazon and found the Jedis of fasting, Fung and Ramos. Since January, I've been on an aggressive fasting cycle. I have feasted 72 of the last 150 days, fasted 43. I did in slugs of 1.5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 days.
Yeah, change it up.
Yeah, changing it up. The goal was to up my caloric intake on feasting days to raise the BMR set point, the basal metabolic rate. That's
right.
Your calorie expenditure.
Yep.
I took no measurements of BMR, but I'm quite certain my BMR has gone up. I feel juiced all the time, fasted or not.
Excellent.
I have lost no scale weight. Now listen up, children. I have lost no scale weight. In fact, as of yesterday, I'm 220 pounds, up 8 pounds from my low. However, I have lost a ton of central adiposity. That means belly fat.
Belly fat, yeah.
My pants have gone from 40 to 42 waist to 36 waist. The body has trimmed itself all over. Even my shoes are looser. I sleep better. I snore less. I can eat or not eat anytime. I am in full control. Booyah! My A1C, 5.9.
Okay, drop the mic.
Mic drop. My endocrinologist graduated me from his practice. Well done, Raj.
Yeah,
well done. This is a story that plays itself out over and over and over again. If you go to success.2keto.com, you don't have to sign up for the forum. That'll take you right to the page where you can see all these pictures and read all these stories. Yeah.
It's funny, that the standard of care is to medicate a diabetic to 7.0.
Yeah.
And at that point, we're only going to get worse. If you medicate somebody to 7.0, or even if they somehow find a dietary solution that'll get them to 7.0, they're still going to only get sicker the more time goes on. You have to get them below that. You have to get them below sort of 6.0.
And you see what happened with Raj. He was fat adapted, and then magic started happening. He's in full control. And I just want to re-highlight his fasting efforts have not resulted in weight loss, maybe even weight gain, but he's lost inches. His body is turning into a mostly fat body to a mostly lean body. Isn't that interesting?
That's outstanding.
Yep.
Well done, Raj.
Yeah, well done. So what do you got, Richard?
So mine's more of a tip. It's also from the Ketogenic Forum, and this is from one of our regulars called Captain Bob. And this is in response to somebody saying that they no longer keep Blue Diamond almonds around because I would always eat too many of them. And almonds aren't even all that good a choice for us keto nuts. Almonds aren't too bad. There are worse, but pecans are better and macadamias are even better.
And pecans are delicious.
They're all delicious.
Oh my God.
Nuts are just good. So anyway, Captain Bob says that he has the same issue with nuts. He says the recommended serving for any addictive food is 1 box or bag or whatever it came in. So what Captain Bob does is he takes this box of almonds, which has more nuts that he wants to take into one serving, and he splits them into Ziploc baggies and into the serving size that he wants to limit himself to. And then if what he'll do is he'll take just one Ziploc bag with just his serving size of nuts into the living room, watch his TV while he snacks, and that way he limits himself to just a small amount. So that's a very good
smart
technique, and it's the same for like school lunches and all these kinds of things. It's a really appropriate way, because if you have, let's say you go out and you buy a kilogram of macadamia nuts, if you just have a kilogram of macadamia nuts in a bag, that bag the level in that bag is going to slowly drop. Whereas if you then split it all into bags and into Ziploc baggies, and maybe you freeze the ones you're not going to eat immediately, so you've got to then thaw them. It sort of like slows things down a little bit, which I think it's a good tip.
Yeah, good tip.
Thanks, Captain Bob.
Awesome. Thanks, Captain. Mm-hmm. Okay, now let's roll the interview that you did with Professor Ken Sikaris while in Perth.
So I'm here in Perth with Professor Ken Sikaris. We've just been to the Low Carb Perth conference where he gave us a presentation in cholesterol.
Yes,
and
another one.
Yes. Well, your presentations on YouTube have been fantastic.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, when people go low carb, when they first do, the first thing that their GPs and their friends and their family will tell them is, you eat so much fat, you're going to give yourself a heart attack. And
yes,
it's a relief to see somebody explain the entire process as much as can be explained in a YouTube presentation.
Yeah, well, I get a lot of calls from doctors and from patients about this issue, about their cholesterol rising. And I have to admit, when I first looked into it, I do expect cholesterol to rise on a high-fat diet.
Yeah.
And some people might fall, but it's just by chance, really. Most people rise, and some people rise significantly. And, and Dave Feldman's on the right track that he's saying that, you're really changing fat transport.
Yeah.
And that's what that cholesterol's reflecting.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a marker for fat being transited around the body.
And rather than, most doctors and patients being reassured by the significant increases in HDL cholesterol as a proportion of that cholesterol rise, the HDL or the good cholesterol rise, they focus on the LDL or the so-called bad cholesterol.
Right. Yes.
And that's where most of their knowledge has stopped, that LDL is bad, so therefore any increase, whether or not it's offset by a HDL rise, is bad.
Yeah, it's remarkable because we tend to be fixated on cholesterol as being the demon. And
yes,
is it because we've just got drugs that can knock it on the head? Is that?
No, I mean, I think, you look back with hindsight and you think, how could they think cholesterol? No, I mean, plaque is full of cholesterol. And apart from the confusion that Keyes created, saturated fats increase cholesterol. That was true. There's cholesterol in plaque, saturated fats increase cholesterol. Well, a very simple view of the world would be that saturated fats increase cholesterol and ends up in plaque.
Yeah.
But that is completely naive, especially by today's knowledge.
Right. So what do saturated fats, how do they affect the system?
So by increasing, in fat adaptation, when you're fat adapted, you've got an increase in transport of fatty acids, and the particles. I mean, there's fatty acids in the blood, but essentially triglycerides are transported by this VLDL molecule, particularly out of the liver, and then and that VLDL's molecule's job is to distribute fat, triglyceride,
energy.
That's because that's what you've switched on, and that's why the triglycerides, were high before. You were distributing it, but not using it.
Right, yeah.
Whereas now, with a high-fat diet, you're distributing it and using it, so the triglycerides are low.
Yeah.
But the truck, I think Dave talks about boats now.
He does. He's on the boats now.
But I say trucks. The trucks, which have offloaded their triglyceride, they can go back to the liver, and most people, it goes back to the liver fairly quickly, but some people it hangs around longer.
Right.
And as long as it's not becoming small and dense, it's sort of just accumulating and reflecting this high traffic flow, then it's a so the VLDL becomes LDL, and therefore the high VLDL transport becomes a high LDL level, and that LDL level will go back to the liver.
Right. And as long as it goes back benign and large.
That's right. That's how the body's built. That's what it was built for.
Yes.
That was,
You're built to have LDL.
LDL. You're built to have a VLDL to transport fat.
Yep.
And LDL is the end product of that. And LDL hangs around a little bit longer, I think, to distribute cholesterol to tissues that can't make it themselves.
Yeah.
But it hangs around for days, on average. And then it goes back to the liver. And that's that's completely natural. This large buoyant LDL, which people in their 80s can have a cholesterol of 8 with large buoyant LDL, and they don't have heart attacks.
Right.
So it's a natural thing.
So what in a standard lipid panel is related to cardiovascular disease?
Now when we look at what predicts risk. It's a whole lot of ratios, mathematical ratios. My favourite is the total cholesterol HDL ratio.
Okay.
But a lot of the carb community thinking of the trig to HDL ratio.
Sure.
But it's a ratio of two numbers. Now, it's a mathematical truth that they reflect cardiovascular risk, but it doesn't necessarily mean that those parameters are anything but surrogate markers of a process.
Right.
It's not that when you've got this number, the number doesn't float around and kill you. It's reflecting something that's happening.
Yeah.
And the thing that it's reflecting that's happening is the lack of triglyceride transport.
Right.
So when patients aren't fat adapted and the liver makes triglycerides and it's making it out of sugar, it floats around in the blood, but the tissues aren't interested in it.
Exactly.
Because they're not using it.
They're not using it.
And so it floats around in the blood. And now this VLDL transport mechanism for triglyceride is broken. It's these trucks are hanging around. Who wants our triglyceride?
Even fat cells aren't buying any.
No. I mean, they're busy using glycogen.
Yeah,
so, I mean, fat adaptation is a huge thing. I mean, normally, if you're not fat adapted, muscle's using 80% carbs as fuel.
Right.
When you're fat adapted, it switches the other way around.
Remarkable.
So it's an incredible process. It's it can be a bit painful to get into fat adaptation, but once you're there, you've completely changed metabolism. So if the triglycerides aren't being taken up, then VLDL takes longer to release its load.
Right.
And the fact that there's all these triglyceride-rich particles floating around in the blood means that even the LDL particle changes and can't get back to the liver when it should do.
Right.
And it hangs around in the circulation twice as long as it should do, and it becomes hard and dense.
Yeah. And it's got more opportunity for mischief as well.
Absolutely.
Oxidization.
And very much like, a truck that's out on the road and you haven't cleaned it, it'll start to rust, oxidation.
Yeah.
And, it'll start sticking all sorts of rubbish like glucose, glycated.
Yeah, sure. Great
and
analogy.
that makes it even more rubbishy. Not only is it small and dense, but it's got all this damage.
Sticky.
And that stuff can only be cleared by the clearance system of the immune system with the macrophages.
Right. And this is in the wall of the arteries. So.
Well, it would occur everywhere. So people with problems returning their LDL to the blood, they can also have skin lesions, like they have in familial hypercholesterolemia, where they have a genetic problem returning LDL.
Yeah.
They have thickened tendons and they have like little cholesterol blisters under their eyes.
Yeah,
so it's not just in the blood vessel wall; it's all over the body.
Right.
And so, but the damaging part is in the blood vessel wall because it's interfering with blood transport and oxygen transport.
It weakens a high pressure system.
Yes, and once and as people say that it'll narrow the artery, the cholesterol accumulation will narrow the artery, and that means less oxygen can get through and people can get angina.
Sure.
But the worst thing is that narrowed artery has incredible turbulence, and that turbulence damages the blood vessel lining, and it means that not only that altered particle can get into the blood vessel wall where the macrophages are there to mop it up, and that's when how the cholesterol starts to accumulate even worse. And then, the wall becomes fragile and can break down, and then a clot forms. So there's a narrowed thing, but then a clot forms in that narrowness.
Yeah.
Now it's completely obstructed. That's a heart attack.
Yes.
Rather than angina.
Right. If it happens in the wrong place, it's deadly. Yeah.
And one of the promising things, now statins, which they are overutilized, but they do work.
Yeah.
Whether it's a subtle increase in, they do work. So how do they work?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, they lower cholesterol, yes. They lower LDL cholesterol, yes. No, they particularly lower small dense LDL. They prevent this LDL particle hanging around for too long and becoming small.
Yeah.
So it actually, it acts
Improves
on the liver.
LDL clearance.
That's right. It acts on the liver to improve that receptor-based clearance.
Oh, wow. Do they know the mechanism for that?
Well, they do, because statins obstruct cholesterol production.
Right.
And so the liver, thinks, well, my job is to transport cholesterol around the body. That's what it's trying to do. That's why it makes all this cholesterol, so that it can be transported as VLDL and then as LDL. So it can repackage it. So it'll take it back as LDL and repackage it with some triglycerides and send it out again, like a fresh load of triglyceride and LDL.
Recycled
and that recycling occurs faster when you're on a statin.
Which makes sense if there's some part of the mechanism that can recognise, hey, we can't make this stuff. We're being enzyme is being inhibited. We just can't produce any more of it. We're just going to have to go back in and recycle the stuff.
Make sure that it's constantly available.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I'm aware of the biochemical pathways.
Yes.
There's like 5 things there's CoQ10 and there's vitamin K and there's a lot of things that are really kind of important to us.
That's right.
Being inhibited.
People do have their own set level for cholesterol.
Right.
I mean, people focus on the number that's on a report. So in the Australian figures, you might say 5.5 is the risk level for total cholesterol.
Yeah.
But the range for healthy people is like 3.8 or 3.5 to 7.5.
Really?
Like, it's a huge range. Yeah. And people think when they've got a cholesterol of 7, well, you must have some dastardly disease.
Right.
But that's what people commonly have. Yeah. And it's their set point.
Yeah. I know my set points sort of it got to the point where I have a set point around about 200 milligrams per deciliter in US terms, and it floated around there, but it just got just a little bit too high, and that it triggered a threshold where every physician I went to said you should be on a statin, and so I went on a statin, but people who listen to this podcast are well aware of my statin story. But to cut a long story short, I became extremely diabetic. My glucose went to hell in a handbasket, but my LDL, as advertised, halved to 96. And if you were just looking at LDL as a sole biomarker, you'd be happy. That'd be a happy outcome.
It's a good outcome because you've reduced your small dense LDL by improving this cycling, and it does reduce your risk, whether it's high or low. It reduces your risk, by 20 or 30%. So it does work, but the issue is it reduces the small dense LDL. It doesn't get rid of the underlying mechanism that's generating the small dense LDL.
No, it's a symptomatic treatment.
It is. It's a Band-Aid.
I don't know why, but for some reason in the medical profession, symptomatic treatment used to be a pejorative until about the 70s, and then it just sort of disappeared.
Yeah, but if that's the only treatment you've got. So as in most doctors' eyes who aren't aware of the dietary manipulations that are possible, that's the only thing they've got.
Yes.
So that's why they hang on to it so desperately.
Right.
Because they aren't aware of an alternative. And to be honest, personally, I think that if somebody had a high risk, bad family history, or they've already had a heart attack and they're on a statin, I would say don't come off it because it's doing something good. Don't come off it until you've reached those goals with your diet.
Yeah, and maybe supplement CoQ10 and the other things that, if you could take the statin for that purpose and supplement the things that it's also preventing you from making.
Yeah, but ideally you don't want to live on a tablet for the rest of your life. You want to get rid of the underlying cause rather than treat the side effect of one of the I mean, it is helping, but it's not treating the underlying problem.
No. So I know with the small dense LDL, the lab in Australia that we get this done is Sydney Adventist Hospital.
Yes.
And I send mine because in Australia, apparently Medicare will pay if your total cholesterol is above 6,
Yes.
Medicare will pay for a 6-monthly lipoprofile subfraction analysis.
Right. They pay for a lipoprotein electrophoresis,
right,
which is meant to pick up this remnant cholesterol thing.
Yeah.
But this is the same mechanism, so we can say, well, we weren't specifically looking for the intermediate density. We were actually looking for small dense. But
I
you
didn't
can
know
get
that. Yeah.
So it might cost, say, $80 to do, which the government give you $30 back for some other underlying purpose. And
sure.
So there is an important difference in Australia and America. So in Australia, we measure small dense LDL by the small.
Yes.
We measure the size.
Yeah. We bin them into different categories, right?
Yes, but it's by size. So small, dense LDL.
Gotcha.
So it's small. But there's other ways of measuring it by density.
Gotcha.
So NMR methods and ultracentrifugation methods measure density. So there is a little bit of a trick there because a patient with there's a form of LDL called Lp(a), and it's like LDL with a tail on it, the ApoA protein. Yeah. And otherwise, the LDL is the same as the one without the tail in that person. They've got LDL without the tail and LDL with the tail.
Sure.
Now, if they've got small dense LDL, they'll have small dense LDL with the tail.
Okay.
Now, but when you're measuring the size, the small dense LDL with the tail looks bigger because it's got a tail on it.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of
That's a nuance.
Yes, a nuance. So patients with Lp(a), measuring small dense LDL by size can be misleading.
Yeah.
But measuring by density is not misleading.
Yeah.
And that's one subtle reason why I don't generally promote that small dense LDL, because there can be artifacts there. You really want to look at the underlying reason why there's small dense LDL, which is related to triglycerides.
Yeah.
Now, people have watched my podcast. I do point out that triglycerides are the underlying cause, this blockage in fat metabolism.
Yeah.
But all of the predictors, like we talked, the total cholesterol HDL ratio, that hasn't got triglycerides in it.
No.
You don't even measure triglycerides to calculate that ratio.
No.
So how can this ratio, which doesn't include triglyceride, predict what's happening with small dense LDL?
Yeah.
So there's a paradox in what I'm saying.
Yeah, but unless it's reflecting the underlying cause that's causing the triglycerides to be elevated.
And it's the same mechanism where triglycerides make LDL small, is the same mechanism where triglycerides drop HDL. It's exactly the same mechanism called cholesterol ester transport protein.
Right.
And so, in a way, and because triglycerides are so variable from day to day, people don't realize it, because even on a low-carb diet, you might say, I'm 0.6 one day and 0.9 the next, and you think, well, that's not much of a difference. That's a 50% difference.
I know.
If your ratio jumped by 50%, you'd be – and that's what happens.
Yeah.
So triglycerides are a very variable number.
Yeah.
And so they're even though that's the cause, it varies so much from hour to hour, let alone day to day. Whereas HDL, you'll find people, that it shifts very slowly.
Right.
If you're 0.9 today, you won't be far from 0.9 tomorrow.
Sure.
And so if you want to look at this mechanism that creates small dense LDL, the HDL is a better indicator because it's a more stable indicator.
It's a more slow-moving indicator, yeah.
And it's not only that, but it's an exponential indicator, and for the mathematicians the reciprocal of HDL has this hyperbolic relationship to risk.
So it's a log relationship.
Yes.
So you could do one
and
on
so
log
it
HDL.
reflects the true exponential relationship between falling HDL and this rapidly increasing risk rather than a linear increase in risk.
Wow.
And so that's why everybody finds, and that's why in the past they thought triglycerides, well, that's a useless predictor.
Yeah.
And that's why they probably threw it out as an underlying mechanism, because they think,
it's exponential.
I was there. I mean, I was there 30 years ago, and we sort of said, don't worry about the triglyceride, it's all the LDL.
Yeah. Well, so it's surprising to me, actually, that in Australia, all of this is measured by the Sydney Adventist Hospital. I thought these guys were like the antithesis of the low carb crowd.
Look, and
how did that happen?
Look, they're not. I mean, they are sort of cereal focused, carb focused, but they're not doing that out of a deception. That's what their true belief is.
Right, yeah, that's true.
And they're very interested in preventing heart disease.
Yeah.
And so the cardiologists at that hospital said, they've read the work of, Reven and Krause and everyone, and they said, well, this is an important thing to measure. So they insisted on setting it up in the hospital with the on it. And they used it in their studies. And I don't know how the studies went. Probably not too well.
Not too good. Yeah.
But the assay was still there, and the people saw that it gave this, conflicting information, which was of importance. So they kept the assay going.
Right.
And they really kept it going at cost.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
wonderful. It's a wonderful service, and I've used it, and it's been beneficial to me because I can see exactly, I could see my small dents. It was high when I first started, and it dropped once I was on a low-carb diet. So, that was good for me.
Yeah, I mean, the ratio, if you've got a very good ratio, or say your trigs are always 0.5, well, spending the money is just so you can show off, here's my small dense LDL level, look at it, how
it's
good
a pretty
it is.
Chart. Yeah.
But and similarly, if your triglycerides are way high, there's hardly, if you want to shock the person into doing something, because look at all this red on the graph, then it's a good motivator. So really it's all around sort of patient engagement measuring this thing, because we've really got a pretty good idea by the ratios, the HDL ratios, whether you're likely to have it present.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in the low-carb stuff in the first place? Because it seems strange for a lipidologist to...
Yeah, well, Rod Taylor, who runs Low Carb Down Under, he first put me in touch with the Melbourne Paleo Group.
Okay.
And the Paleo Group came to me and they said, we're interested in the microbiome.
Yeah.
Could you explain it to me? And I said, well, I'm a chemical pathologist and I don't think anybody understands the microbiome yet. And they said to me, but we're just, computer people, and we don't understand anything about it. So you'll be able to understand more than me. And so I said, okay, well, I'll look into it and give you a little talk.
Yeah.
So we've invited the group back. They were supposed to have 20 or 30 people, and I was going to give this lecture, and only about 5 or 10 turned up. It was Saturday morning. They must have had a lot of stuff on, and they were very apologetic about it. And they said to me, "Oh, look, do you mind if we record it, and then we can give it to the people who haven't turned up?" And I said, "Yeah, that's fine," because I wasn't very social media aware at the time. So they said, and then they later said, "The easiest way for us to distribute it is by YouTube." And I thought, yeah, that sounds a good idea. And so I didn't know. And a few months later, I was a bit shocked when I looked at the YouTube and 20,000 people had watched. Wow. Because it was not what I meant to do. And then suddenly other people started hearing about somebody who, could explain pathology, and including Damon Gamma, the sugar film. So he saw that and he said, I want this guy too. He dressed you up
as Dracula.
Yeah, he dressed me up. Yeah, I've never checked the contract that I had with that movie. But I don't know whether it included the cartoon caricature or not. But anyway, that's done a great job, that movie. So any embarrassment that I feel is sort of well
paid.
Yeah. So, and it's just built from that. I mean, I've tried to dumb down what I'm saying. I'm still haven't mastered that, because there's a lot of technical stuff there. But
well, our audience really appreciates it when you do go a little bit technical, because I do it often in the podcast, and one of the most common comments that I get from people is, "We love it how you go technical." Okay, I'll do that more often.
Yeah, well, you try to give a bit of both. Give a little bit of a, transport of trucks and boats explanation for people that don't want to think in these abstract terms, and then you let in a bit of the new stuff.
Yeah. So I heard that your daughter was diabetic.
Yes.
And so that was sort of what got you looking in and researching into.
Well, that sort of left me primed for low carb, because type 1 diabetics are counting carbs. Yeah. According to the current mechanism, you know how many grams of carbs on everything you eat.
Yeah.
And the parents, because Louisa was only 10 when she got the disease, and the parents have to learn it as well.
Yeah.
So as soon as Robert Lustig came to Australia in 2007 and
Right.
told us about sugar and fatty liver and so on, and a couple of years later, Louisa gets that, and I'm sort of appreciating how much sugar is in all these foods that she's eating and starch.
And you had probably had her glucometer, and so you were watching these perturbations on her.
Yeah, because she's the daughter of a specialist in medicine. She was like in every research trial,
of course.
and one of the first to go on pumps and meters and everything. So I was already primed to understanding, and really with Louisa, we also knew how resistance could change with the higher carbs she has. The more resistant she became, the more insulin she required, and so it was all making perfect sense. When we started getting into the low carb and thinking, well, this is, and as we heard during the day today, it makes such perfect sense for the type 1 diabetic.
Yes, it was actually a very type 1 diabetic heavy day today. I enjoyed that for one, because I hear a lot about type 2 diabetics, because obviously that's 90% of all diabetes, but it was...
Look, to a degree, people don't have a lot of sympathy for people who are overweight, obese, or type 2.
That's true.
They've still got this attitude, it's your fault, rather than the fault of the people that... Whereas with a child, particularly in a disease that comes, they're just completely innocent.
Yes.
And so the issue of they're innocent and you have to help them as much as you can.
Right.
And so that's why it's got such a foothold in the type 1 community, because these children deserve all of the help that they can get. Adults are sort of a little bit more independent. They're they should be engaged in their own health, but for a child, and the patterns you set up in a child, the autonomy and the confidence that they have in taking control of their own affairs is not only a biological thing; it's quite a mental thing as well.
It certainly is.
Yes.
So thank you very much for this. This has been a wonderful, pleasant chat. And I know you've got to catch a flight. You're going to Las Vegas, and you're going to look at. You're going to go into my field, which is computer knowledge-based systems.
Yes, Rather than medical disruption, I'm getting into the true digital disruption realm.
Lovely. Well, I enjoy that, and have a safe flight. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Rich.
Cheers.
Heard you say you're due for a little.
Wow, that was a great interview. I'm really grateful that you got to record conversations with these guys while you were there.
Yeah.
This is invaluable stuff.
It seems like we're doing a lot of stuff from Perth, but we had a lot of really interesting people there. So, the Ken Sikaris, I remember when his videos first came out about cholesterol, I was worried. My LDL went up a little bit on a ketogenic diet, so that was a slight concern for me. But he explained the difference between large buoyant LDL and small dense LDL, and then LDL-A, and the difference between HDL and LDL, and what their roles are in the body. And when I realized that LDL is just a carrier for fat energy throughout the blood, then it didn't seem like bad cholesterol anymore.
Yeah, when you're a fat burner, fat is your energy source. Naturally, you're going to have more transport of it. So,
sure.
What's interesting is after a while of listening to lipid experts describe this natural process of lipids that, VLDL and LDL are transport system for energy in the body, it's just not the scary ogre we thought it was.
Yeah.
I also thought it was interesting to hear a little more detail about how statins work. That was cool.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
Great stuff.
Okay, so I'm feeling a little bit peckish,
Puckish?
Peckish.
Peckish?
I think it might be time for some recipes!
Recipes.
Okay, what do you got, Carl?
Okay, well, this is a real recipe I did, and I think I talked about this a little bit before on another show, but I didn't actually give the recipe. So this is a fennel seed pork chop with lemon garlic butter.
Nice.
And I got these pork chops at a local farm. I'm a big fan of this, kids. Go find the local farms in your area, make friends with those farmers, and get good, fresh, clean meat, if you can. So these pork chops were big and had a huge fat cap on them. They were just enormous. So if you've never seared a pork chop on the stove before, cooked it in a fry pan,
Sure.
You may not know whether it's done or not unless you stick a thermometer in it, So the best thing to do is to get an extra one that you can use as your guinea pig.
Right.
And time it.
A sacrificial pork chop.
Sacrificial pork chop, one that you don't mind cutting into to see if it's done or not.
Right.
And you might want to make those incisions in different places so that you still have some chop left every time you check it.
Sure.
All right. Me, I've sort of just figured out by time and by feel how long it takes to cook a pork chop on the stove. But that's what you're going to do. You're going to get a sizzling cast iron skillet. In other words, you're going to put that cast iron skillet on high heat. All right? High flame, high electric heat, whatever. Get it the hottest you can. Don't put any oil or butter in the pan. Especially now, if you have really dry meat,
right,
and you have seasoning on the outside, like a
rub,
like a rub or something, that's a different story. But this is a pork chop with a lot of fat.
Yeah.
So the only preparation I did to the meat was fennel seed, salt, and pepper.
Do you grind the fennel seed up, or you just use this?
I didn't.
The whole
no,
seed? Yeah.
I just used the whole seed because I want that pop in my mouth. All right, so sear it on both sides. Now I have propane ranges, so for me it took about 5 minutes per side.
Right,
but you're going to be different. All right,
and you need to learn that about your equipment because your different pans are going to be different. And
exactly, and that's why you have a sacrificial pork chop. So it's key though when you're searing to leave it alone.
Yeah,
to not move it. Right, you want to get that thing in contact with the heat and leave it alone.
Yeah.
So after, 4 or 5 minutes, flip it over. If it looks crusty and then you push it with your finger and it doesn't have the give that raw meat has, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Cook it on both sides until it's done, and you can tell it's done because there's no pink in the middle. All right?
Yeah, you don't want pork to be pink in the middle.
No, pink pork, not good. So when it's done, what you want to do is get a room temperature plate and move that pork chop to the plate.
Nice.
And just let it sit for 5 minutes while you make a lemon garlic butter.
Yeah. My theory is if I cook it on one side for so many minutes, I cook it on the other side for so many minutes, I let it sit resting for the same number of minutes. And you just want to make sure to do that because what happens if you cut into it immediately?
All the juice runs out.
That's it. Yeah.
Yep. So you want to allow it time for the juices to be reabsorbed into the meat, and it'll just make it that much better.
Yeah.
So the lemon garlic butter that we're going to make is from a beurre monté. Now, beurre monté we learned about, it's just lifted butter. It's just water and butter whisked for 4 or 5 minutes over the lowest bubbling heat that you can get. In other words, if it's rolling boil, you don't want that. If it's not bubbling at all, you don't want that. You want it on the lowest temperature that it bubbles at. So you just keep whisking. Just keep whisking. How much? All right, a stick of butter, 1/3 of a cup of water, something like that.
Yeah.
Yep. Melt it all together and then just keep whisking while it's bubbling. And after about 4 or 5 minutes, and yes, it's going to take 4 minutes, it's going to thicken up. All right.
Nice.
So now you can flavor this butter however you want to. What I did was I added the juice of half a lemon, the zest of an entire lemon, and about 4 cloves of crushed garlic.
So do you do this on the pan that you cook the meat in so the fond of the pan lifts up?
That is a great way to do it. If you have fond on the pan, you can now use that to sort of deglaze it. That's a great way to do it. If you also, a beurre monté, you can add to any kind of demi-glace or any kind of reductive sauce made from stock.
Stock, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So you can just put the garlic and lemon and other flavors if you want in there while you're whisking it. The garlic isn't gonna burn because there's water in there, and it's just gonna make this thick, rich sauce that you can now just spoon over or pour over your pork chop. And let me tell you, kids, that's delicious.
Yeah, sounds good. Nice.
Yeah. So that's what I got. What do you got?
So I've got a recipe that we actually had last night for dinner. And what happened was we were in Costco. And by the way, I should mention to Aussies who go to Costco that Costco now has shirataki noodles.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it's really cheap. So anyway, I had this recipe last night. We were at Costco. We picked up some shirataki noodles. And as we were going through the meat aisle, Julie found a plate of pork ribs. It was basically an entire rib section of a pig, and it was.
Now, were they the spare ribs or the baby backs?
They were the spare ribs. So but they had a lot of meat on them and a lot of fat on them.
Yeah.
And so what I did was I got an Instant Pot. I cut the slab of ribs into two so that I could fit in the Instant Pot, and I just threw a whole bunch of things into that. Put in some vinegar, put in some smoked tomato sauce, and put in some spices. Well, I'm going to actually put a link to a recipe that was very similar to the way I cooked it. But I generally don't. I don't use recipes. I come up with the recipe on the fly with things that I've got in the house. But this recipe starts with about 2 pounds of boneless country style pork ribs.
That's what we call them in the States.
Right. Yeah. This is a US recipe. So the way you do this recipe is you sprinkle your ribs with a little bit of onion, salt, some pepper, and some paprika. You can use things like fennel. I would generally grind fennel up to use for a rub, but you don't. A lot of people use sugar for a rub. You don't need to use sugar. It's not necessary for meat. It maybe makes the meat caramelize just a little bit more, but you could just caramelize meat very easily in a hot pan. You don't need sugar.
That's right.
So basically, this recipe suggests in the pressure cooker you brown the ribs in the oil. So you put a little bit of canola oil. I wouldn't use canola oil. I'd use a bit of lard or something,
avocado oil.
Yeah, or something
lard,
like that.
Yeah.
But I don't like to use a pressure cooker for browning meat. I like to use a pan on the stove.
Yeah.
I have a propane burner, and so I can crank it up, get it really hot. With a pan, I can control everything, and I just use tongs to move the meat around. And I don't generally use, a little bit like Carl with his pork chops, if I'm going to cook pork, I don't generally need to put a lot of oil in the pan. I might put a little bit of lard in, but if the pork's very fatty, you don't even need that. So anyway, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be browning the outside of the ribs, and this just adds to the flavour. What I do is I add the meat to the pressure cooker, and I'm going to add to it like a cup of water, 3 tablespoons of ketchup, and instead of using ketchup, I actually make smoked tomato, which is just I use a hot smoker to do that, and I've got the recipe on our website. We'll put it in the show notes, but it's on our blog recipe.
And especially for ribs, you get that smoky barbecue flavor.
But you can use tomato paste. You can use peeled tinned tomatoes. You don't need a lot of them to be able to add the flavour. We're going to add about 4.5 teaspoons of white vinegar or apple cider vinegar. We're going to add about a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce and a teaspoon of mustard. So use a nice Dijon mustard. And the recipe says 1/8 of a teaspoon of celery seed. I actually use celery itself. I chop up celery. And what I'll do is I'll get an entire stalk of celery. I'll chop it up and I'll fry it up, put it into ice cube molds, and then in my freezer, I'm going to freeze them into ice cube molds. I've got cooked celery ready to go. It's like 1/3 of a mirepoix.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's pretty much.
You can also add a little liquid smoke if you want some of that more barbecue flavor and you don't have smoked tomato.
That's true. So in my smoke, my tomatoes are already smoked. So, but you're right, a little bit of liquid smoke. The Worcestershire sauce also adds a little bit of that flavor as well. So so you just put it into your pressure cooker, and I cooked mine for about an hour. So what you're trying to do is break down the sinews and turn them into gelatin, and basically it takes about an hour, maybe sometimes an hour and a half. So after an hour, crack open the pressure cooker, test the meat, make sure that it's just falling off the bone, pull all the bones out. And so what I did was I pulled the meat out of the pressure cooker, and I used a stick blender to blend up the sauce in the pressure cooker. Now, the recipe suggests pulling off the fat off the top of the the liquid. Of course, we don't do that
Hell
in
no.
ketogenic diet. No, that's where the flavour is. So,
That's awesome.
blend it up. It'll emulsify quite nicely into all the liquid ingredients. And so that's my recipe. It's a fairly simple one. It's essentially just brown meat off, put it in a pressure cooker, add a bunch of things that you think might taste well with that meat, and cook it for about an hour. If it still needs cooking, cook it for another half an hour.
That's it.
Ain't rocket surgery, people.
No, you just try a few things, and whatever works, you do it again.
That's it.
Right?
But tonight we ate that, and it was delicious. So that's my recipe.
Awesome. Well, that's a show. What a great show. Thanks to Ken Sikaris for speaking to Richard down in Perth.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening.
Yeah, of course, if you have anything you want to tell us, something we said wrong, something you don't agree with, some more research that you found to support or refute anything that we've said, send my email to dudes@2ketodudes.com or post it on our website.
And you can follow us on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Instagram at 2KetoDudes. Make sure to use the hashtag 2KetoDudes.
And of course, if you want to join the free ketogenic forum, it's forum.2keto.com. And you can have a look around the ketogenic forum without needing to create an account by starting with success.2keto.com.
Absolutely. And if useless swag is your fancy, t-shirts, coffee mugs, and other junk with our mugs on it, head over to gear.2keto.com.
And if you want a shot at getting some of that swag for free, join the 2 Keto Dudes fan club. You'll be eligible to win something in every show. Go to fanclub.2keto.com.
And if you feel like supporting our forums and all the podcasts we produce, including 2 Keto Dudes, Keto Woman with Daisy Brackenhall, Keto Families, Keto Kids, and the Obesity Code podcast with Jason Fung and Megan Ramos, think about making a monthly pledge on our Patreon page at patreon.2keto.com.
Or just hit the donate button on our website at www.2ketodudes.com or just go to donate.2keto.com.
And you can also see all of our podcasts and other videos like Carl's Keto Kitchen on YouTube at youtube.2keto.com. And check out my videos at carlsketokitchen.com.
And if you haven't already, go leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That's how new people get to know about what we do. 2
Keto Dudes is brought to you by 2 Keto LLC, who strives to support the low-carb community with podcasts and other publications. Well, keep calm, keto on, and fast when you can.
Yeah, keep calm, keto on, Carl, and Keto Fest at least once a year.
Yes, absolutely. All right, we'll see you next time on 2 Keto Dudes.